So yeah, I'm Maddie. I'm the head of growth at the Solana Foundation, and we have Mark, Daljit, and Nam. And these guys have extensive experience participating in creating DAOs. And so, but first, probably good to introduce yourself and tell us the project you're working on. And yeah, you can start, Mark.
Okay, thanks. Hey everyone, I'm Mark. I have kind of a split role. So I'm a postdoc at the university, ETH Zurich, where I'm researching DAOs, like governance mechanisms and like incentive designs, like the impact of tokens on human behavior. And in my other life, basically, I'm a practitioner. So I'm building like two DAOs, like one with Onocoin and one with Waihai. So these are deepen projects building on Solana. And yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Cool. I'm Daljit. We're with a project called Open Block Labs. We basically are a service provider to DAOs. We work with Lido, Solana, some of the largest DAOs in the ecosystem, and crypto broadly. And we're basically helping them with economic modeling or any sort of like more intensive decision making to solve their toughest problems. And so we do a lot of decentralized decision making and would love to share some of that with you today.
Hi, I'm Nam. I'm the current CEO of MonkeyDAO. It's an organization based around the Solana monkey business NFTs, and it's also one of the first DAOs that was formed on Solana based around NFT collections in general. We are now running 3,000 members across the world, and we not only do standard NFT projects of social organizations pulling people together and working on promoting member projects, but we also run a grant program in partnership with the Solana Foundation alongside running a member venture syndicate. So we really focus on how we can not only help generate the next series of community projects, but also make it so that people who are joining into the Solana community have an understanding of what they should be doing or where they should be spending their efforts so that we can build the next generation of projects.
Great, thanks guys. So I think it's best to start before we get into the nitty-gritty of decision-making and DAOs and you know, some of the shortcomings. It's important to probably just give your guys' opinion about like why DAOs are important in the first place. And so would love to hear from each of you about why you think it's important.
Yeah, should I start again? Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm deeply fascinated by DAOs, and it's kind of based on my research I'm doing at the university. So we're living kind of in a more and more complex world. So like complex systems, they are defined basically by the links between the nodes and not by the individual nodes. And we're adding every day more links in our system basically. And through this, the society is kind of changing, and our traditional governance mechanisms are not working. Like this top-down control, it's kind of failing. We see this more and more happening all over the place. And basically the solution from complexity science are these bottom-up mechanisms like collective intelligence, self-organization, digital democracy. And I see all of them kind of being combined in DAOs in different aspects. And if one designs them right, I think they are the most powerful tool kind of to steer our society into a direction or path which will make our life better. So this deeply motivates me, and that's, I think, why it's important.
Yeah, basically, I mean, if you look at the last like 15 years or so of crypto, you basically have DAOs take off in terms of like economic, social, political power. And it's, I mean, now they're managing hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars in treasury. And that's a lot of power. And not just that, but they're going, basically they're managing public goods, right? They're managing block space, which we all know and love and care a lot about. But then eventually, like, we're building these coordination mechanisms, and they're gonna start to manage more of our public goods, right? You're talking about like maybe one day water rights, maybe one day global currency. And so the decision making of DAOs and how those operate is gonna start to matter a lot, at least. At least that's our thesis. And so, yeah, we're really, really interested in the problem and who becomes like the service providers for DAOs, who helps them make these very, very large, very important decisions. I think that's going to start to matter quite a bit.
Yeah, DAOs as a mechanism were really designed to be decentralized autonomous organizations. The key part of that is the middle word. It's designed to be autonomous. You're not supposed to be having to continually check up on it or actively manage something like this. It's supposed to essentially run itself on behalf of the community and various other organizations. We're probably much closer to DAOs of just decentralized organizations. And right now, a lot of groups are working through the process of what actually needs to be voted on, organized, what can be left into the hands of subject matter experts, and various other ways that we can continue to improve, like not only the core infrastructure, but also the experience of being inside of a DAO. There's numerous cases, where a lot of these are just essentially multi-sigs run by thousands of people. And rather than voting on what we should be doing or how we should be developing things, we're essentially just approving what we already know and understand from subject matter experts. So right now, I think the goals of DAOs in general should be understanding how we get to that next level of what it takes to actually make members interested or excited about being a part of a DAO, and why they should view that as an alternative for traditional centralized structures.
Nice. So as Daljit said, there's hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, held up in these DAOs. Do you think that they've been, DAOs generally have been managing these funds and allocating resources well, or do you think, they've done a okay job, or do you think they've done a bad job uniformly? So I'd love just to hear, from your perspective, has this been a successful concept for crypto?
Yeah, we do a lot of stuff around grant efficacy and incentive efficacy. If you look at one of the biggest things that DAOs have to make, it's how do we distribute out token incentives and kind of bootstrap a network. And we found honestly that a lot of these grants, the effectiveness of them has been pretty mediocre, right? It's not always the case. Obviously the Bitcoin incentive mechanism has worked surprisingly well, and it's bootstrapped an entire network. So I would say that for most of the time it hasn't really worked as well as we would have liked, but obviously we see some great examples of it, of incentive mechanisms and DAOs basically working really well, or decentralized kind of protocols working well.
Which I guess, which sort of areas or verticals in crypto do you think DAOs have performed the best? You mentioned Bitcoin. I don't think of Bitcoin as a DAO, but I guess it sort of is in its essence. Where do you think, DAOs have been most successful?
Yeah, I think that sometimes when DAOs have really cared about what they're actually incentivizing or growing, we've been able to see huge strides in those verticals or in those metrics. For example, Solana has poured a lot of effort into their developer ecosystem, and I think we see that quite a bit. Or we're seeing certain DeFi protocols care about organic volume or organic usage, and I think we start to, when they focus on the right metrics and it's not gamed, for example TVL or these other metrics, you can start to see some sort of growth there. But those are sometimes few and far between.
What about NFT communities? And you're part of Monkey DAO, Nam. How do you think DAOs have performed generally for NFT communities?
Yeah, Monkey DAO as an organization started around the idea of how we could bring together a small collective group of people who, whether they were developers, traders, people working in the interest of public goods, or just wanting to experience a new ecosystem, and pulling that from a Discord or a group chat into an organization that can be funded, run, and operate on pushing things forward inside of the space. A lot of the problems around DAOs is that right now they're mostly used as ways to push responsibility onto the community rather than empower communities to take action. So instead of presenting ideas and solutions as something that we want to see out of these NFT projects, whether it's what the previous panel was discussing around the future of the ideas of common goals and areas that we're excited about, instead it's usually well, now we have an NFT and we have a group chat, you guys figure the rest out. And that's an area where I think NFT DAOs and Monkey DAO is also working on this, really need to improve the area of how do you empower membership to start making meaningful changes inside of the ecosystem that they're a part of, not just being a transactional or social layer on top of it. We do see DAOs as being very useful inside of token-related governance, usually in the responsibility or management of various different protocols. I would view Marinade on Solana as a very good example of a DAO, even if they don't necessarily always refer it to that. It's a mostly decentralized group based around a voting governance token that uses it as a way to determine whether certain fees or reward schedules should be pushed out. While they obviously, all DAOs run into the issues of centralization of tokens, just because of how most distributions have gone in crypto over the course of the last 15 years. I think a lot of groups are very focused on actively distributing things as much as possible so that the impact of an individual's vote is not overshadowed by someone else, especially if those individuals have more knowledge of an area, but maybe just less representation, mostly because of financial constraints, right? Somebody shouldn't be limited of not having an opinion because they don't have enough money. I think we've been working on that in democracy quite extensively for the last few thousand years of trying to make it so that everybody has the opportunity to have a voice. And NFTs or tokens shouldn't gate that.
Yep, makes sense. So yeah, I think you guys brought up some of the shortcomings and some lack of good performance of these DAOs over time. What is going to what are the few things that you think would create a step function change in the performance of these DAOs and allocating resources effectively over the next few years? What do you think improvements can be made uniformly?
So what needs to be changed? So I think there's sometimes what I perceived recently, this conception that DAOs might be inefficient or like this, and I think what one needs to do is to structure them in such a way that they become most effective, like these DAOs. And here I see that often different mechanisms in DAOs are mixed together. So I think you have on the one hand this collective intelligence of the DAO, of the community, kind of sensing what is the right thing to do. And then you have this self-organization aspect, kind of manifesting it in day-to-day actions. And what I think when DAOs are not working right, very often what one can see is that these actions are delayed until a decision is made. But if you involve everyone to do a specific decision on the bottom level, it just becomes very inefficient and very bureaucratic. So I think what would be an enabler of making DAOs more effective would be looking at these bottom-up mechanisms and not just having these improvement proposals, which are a very structural thing from top down, having mechanisms on the bottom. And at Onocoin and Waihai, we're also looking at a concept called idea markets. So crowdsourcing ideas, funding ideas, and basically without a permission executing them, on a bottom level, something like that. I think this could again facilitate DAOs to be what they were in the beginning, community of creative people, maybe not so structured, and that was the reason why we introduced this structure. But now I think we need to move a bit back again to these creative communities doing cool stuff, basically. Yeah.
There's a few, I think, very key areas that will help improve a lot of not only the effectiveness of DAOs, but also the general exposure or understanding of them. The first one is very clearly regulatory. Not in are DAOs legal, yes or no standpoint, but what does it actually mean to be a voting member of a DAO? Does that entitle you to, for example, shareholder rights if these are structured as traditional corporate entities? Having an understanding of what you are liable for as a DAO member if the DAO does something that you don't agree with. We have plenty of organizations that I think now are slowly being viewed as having committed problematic criminal behavior that are being taken or looked at, but there's not a clear understanding of if I'm a DAO member and I vote against something and the DAO does it anyways, am I liable for that decision even if I'm speaking up against it? In similar ways, when a DAO is successful, what am I legally able to recoup from that? If a DAO makes a great investment, how do I get a dividend legally as an organization? It's not clear from a regulatory side, and again, not just necessarily a law way, but an understanding of how does a DAO being successful benefit me as an individual outside of just potentially the value of the asset as an access mechanism going up or the perceived social benefit of the DAO improving.
How do you think that balances though with like sort of the crypto ethos of code is law, right? Versus it sounding like you want more like, actual laws and, put down by regulators on how, DAO members can be protected or not. So how do you balance those two things about code is law versus like?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite examples because you get to put back to the DAO, which for anyone who wasn't aware was basically a financial protocol on Ethereum. In an example of code is law, if someone is able to make a profitable financial transaction that drains assets out of that DAO, they're a member. They're able to do it. They're able to take other people's money. And again, other people's money, that goes back to the regulatory understanding of who controls what. But in that situation, code was law and someone was able to exploit it for a large financial gain. Social mechanisms kicked in and members of that DAO rolled back that decision to the point where it actually became a fork of Ethereum, right, between current ETH and ETC. In a situation where people always want to say code is law, it's great until you have to figure out, who's the customer support agent. Where do you go when suddenly there's no money in the account, or the decentralized autonomous organization that you trusted has acted in a way autonomously that is not beneficial for any of its members? And I think we love the idea of the cyberpunk ethos of code is law and what we put in for these communities. NFTs and recent communities are a great example of when things are going well, these communities are great, fantastic. When things are going poorly, people look for somebody to blame. And in a DAO, there probably shouldn't be somebody to blame, but that's not, how any of these organizations have actually occurred or what we can look at in the past and how, these things have been looked at or treated in some way, shape, or form. I would love to live in a world where code is law, but I don't think any of us actually want to follow through with that because it puts too much responsibility or blame on users who might not have an understanding of the entire ecosystem they've signed up for, which if everybody has to be an expert in smart contracts in order to be a member of a DAO, there's no point. Like, that's too far gone.
Yeah, it's really hard to make code future-proof. Everybody knows that. So all we can really fall back to is social consensus, right? And maybe there's a hack and we need to fork, and that's just going to be social consensus, and that's going to be a coordination effort, ideally within the DAO. So I think it is the final straw, basically, and it's what we have.
I would agree. I think different communities probably have different values, and you see with Bitcoin the different values than in Ethereum, probably different values than in MonkeyDAO, and I think designing a DAO, one should start with the values of the community one wants to build, and then design the system based on these values, and then forks might be possible, or even in the DNA of that community, or it's not, and it's how is the system.
Interesting. So I think we should segue into the title of the talk, which is Proof of Impact, which we haven't talked about yet. But I think it was important to set the kind of stage about why DAOs are important, where the kind of the current state of them. So Proof of Impact, maybe Daljit, you can kind of give a definition of what that actually means, and we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's basically what's happening is that DAO's success is rooted on their decision making. If they're making smarter decisions, they're going to be more successful. And so if you really boil down, it's all about who's making the decisions. So what you're going to get is a few folks in the DAO, and most likely probably service providers that specialize in certain decision making. They might specialize in incentive optimization like we do, or some sort of data intelligence, or you name it. And the thing is though, what you basically are doing is you're taking this trustless entity that we think is trustless, we're basically putting the trust out into the edges of the DAO. We're giving it to these service providers, these leaders in the DAO, for example. But how do we make sure that they're somewhat trustless? And we have this whole field called crypto economics that basically specializes in how do we have them give us these commitments to make sure that they perform appropriately. And so there's crypto and economics. Economics here is like, we do things like slashing. Maybe the service provider provides, hey, here's $1 million, and you can take it if something goes wrong. Maybe audit shops as service providers should start doing this. There's also, in the field of economics, there's, instead of giving out the grant to the service provider initially, proactively, maybe we're giving it out on a retroactively, or we're giving it out in a performance-based way. We're seeing that a lot in grant funding. So there's this whole economics of how do we incentivize service providers and decision makers and leaders. But then there's also this crypto piece that we can also use. And here, if you consider like a decision, basically someone building out, like taking data, building a model, and running and creating a recommendation, you basically now with zero knowledge can verify your data, verify that you did this training, and create this recommendation and inference, and you can prove it. And this is this whole idea of proof of impact, where let's start using cryptography, let's start combining that with economics, and having service providers basically give you credible commitments to the impact and decisions that they're driving. That's the idea of proof of impact.
Yeah, and I think it's important to call out, like, when you're talking about service providers, like OpenBlock, you guys don't want to divulge all of the mechanisms you used in order to service that DAO, and so that's sort of where the ZK proof comes in, where you can verify that you did something, but you don't have to reveal your models or anything like that may be proprietary to the service provider.
Yeah, you could basically credibly commit that, hey, you use this training set, or that you're using this model and you're recommending based on this model, but maybe that model is super proprietary, and maybe you don't want to share that with other folks, but you can make other credible commitments to show that you're not malicious.
Great. So as you guys are involved in DAOs, is this something that's useful to you guys as you're thinking about choosing service providers for your DAOs? Like, how do you think about proof of impact, and do you think that's a valuable concept for what you guys are building?
I think it's very valuable. Like as I mentioned before, like you have like these bottom-up mechanisms, kind of like in order to have self-organization. The most important parts, or like there are two parts. Like one is the autonomy to act, and the second part is like kind of having feedback loops. So one needs to get feedback, and in our society, I think most feedback loops are broken. So we can do something, we don't get feedback, and through this we cannot self-organize. And I think what you're talking about is like kind of like a part, like trying again to provide this feedback. Like when you have this service provider doing something that you can actually validate it and see as a DAO or sense it if this was meaningful, impactful. And from this perspective, like if this works, it would be, I think, a very important tool potentially to get the self-organization back. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you are always going to run into situations where the teams that you work with are one of the most important areas, and having an understanding of what working with people entails and who you obviously sign on for, brand cohesion, whatever you want to call it, in terms of community support or governance is very, very, very important to make sure that you make those decisions right, and that everybody is in the same alignment, as it were, on what these goals are going forward. Some of that is, you can look at the recent moves over the last few years of, the ESG compliance narrative of how a lot of these different communities are focused on the idea of like battling the idea of, crypto harming the planet, instead focusing on, climate recovery funds or ways that you can offset, the emissions of running a validator, for example, right? Or a lot of the setups that you can look at for teams that you want to work with is, okay, what are we going to do that's going to immediately impact and make sustainable change? Obviously, team at OpenBlock, the guys at Cubic, right, doing this way of decentralized community funding for various different initiatives. Those are good areas, but you also want to make sure that the teams that you are funding through those groups are actually committed to supporting things in general in the ecosystem that you want to see, so that it's not the case of, are we all just voting for something because we would like to make more money as an organization, or are we voting on something as a DAO because we think that it's going to improve the network, for lack of a better word? bottom-up improvements versus top-down financialization or incentives.
Yeah, how do you think of it? Because I think, a lot of DAOs and a lot of the members of DAOs are sometimes in it to, make money, increase, the profitability of the DAO. How do you guys see that manifest itself in sort of like short-term thinking versus long-term thinking, where maybe proposals have an immediate impact, but could take away from long-term growth to make, it's kind of like how companies today, right? They'll take all the revenue that they make and invest it back into the business rather than taking profit early on. How do you see that manifest itself in DAOs? Do you think that you've seen DAOs kind of make that trade-off of reinvesting for future growth? What do you think?
Yeah, I can definitely talk on this one. I think DAO communities in general, if you are buying into something, and because a lot of this is financial buy-in, you obviously have scholarship programs or community incentives where you can nominate members to be an impactful or honorary member in some way, shape, or form. But a lot of people buy their way into this. And as much as I think we would all like to say in crypto that we are not financially motivated, I do not want the thing that I buy to go down in value. It's not a new car that I'm driving off the lot. Right? This is something that I'm hoping that is a part of. I'm spending my Solana on something. I hope it is worth more Solana one day down the line. Right now, I think a lot of DAOs are either invested in these. Making governance tokens more scarce, whether it's buying and burning something based on protocol fees or NFT projects themselves continuously buying things off of the marketplace and setting artificial price floors. Those are very easy styles of votes to get through to a community because it is saying, would you like to make $1 or would you like to make $2? And most people are rational and will vote for, I would like to make $2. The difficult part is when you are at a project that has a treasury or has funding and wants to push something forward, especially in light of recent macroeconomic cycles and the state of where you are in the market. I think DAOs are very, very successful when everybody and their other projects are doing well and there is an abundance of capital and cash flow, and then you are seeing projects willing to deploy funding, whether it's via venture investment, whether it's via grants, or even just social initiatives of things are really going well, let's spend money. Where you see DAOs specifically inside of MonkeyDAO in the last 6 months run into problems is the idea of we were in a downtrending market. NFTs were not immune to that. Solana was not immune to that. How do you convince people to spend the money that you do have in the treasury on things that you think are a good idea and you have subject matter expertise in? Whether it's paying community contributors to keep the lights on and keep things running, or if it's in the idea of we should be investing here so that in 6 to 12 months we are going to have profitable revenue streams or something that's going to continue to increase the DAO. And those proposals are very hard to pass when everybody is down bad or has lost a bunch of money. And you're like, why would we spend any of the stuff that we have in the treasury because we think it's going to be worth 50x more if we sit around for 2 years? And I think that leads to a lot of the other problems of DAOs that we are seeing, which is community inaction, right? If large scale social government proposals like voting on presidents or world leaders struggle to get people to go out and vote, DAOs are obviously not going to be immune to that for what a lot of people view as their second or third, maybe most important group in their social space. If I only have 5 minutes to an hour a day inside of what I can reasonably commit to this social community, am I going to spend that time arguing about different governance proposals, or am I going to do something that's probably a little bit more enjoyable for the average person? So you see, as you get to the point where you need to be spending money, the point of maximum financial or social opportunity, which is usually in the bottom of a market, you also run into the social component of most people check out and they're not there to make those decisions. And that's been, I think, a very clear downfall of DAOs as organizations right now, where they're very successful when things are going up and when everybody feels positive about the ecosystem. They run into very strong problems of contribution or voting commitments when things are not going well because people's attention go elsewhere. And that's because a lot of these are either volunteer-based organizations or social groups.
Yeah, it's interesting because arguably when the market is receding, that's when you need the most kind of participation in DAOs, right? Because you got to come up with some tough decisions on cutting costs or where to spend money to try to weather the storm, right? And so Yeah, Dalji, have you had any experience with this particular area?
Yeah, I think this whole, by the way, this whole class of problems, it's social choice theory, right? It's the class of problems around collective decision making. And to solve collective decision making, there's a lot of components that we need to basically fix. And it's on the voting side, where we have this one coin, one vote idea, and then you have all these people with a lot of coins getting unfair advantage on the voting side, right? So there's mechanisms like quadratic voting that are helpful there, or there's areas around slashing or stake that we should care about around economics. And then there's also these metrics. What should we care about? Should we care about this metric like TVL, which can be easily gamed, or should we care about long-term metrics like number of developers or active developers, and really thinking hard about those metrics, because you fall into Goodhart's law, which is every metric could be gamed, right? And then finally, it's what are these credible commitments? The oldest, I feel like a very similar analogy to DAOs, and a lot of folks talk about it, is the U.S. government, right? And the reason why, it's, it has its problems and whatever, but it has, people's reputations are at risk, and they're playing these long-term games. And so the game theory is that, hey, I should, basically, my reputation is on the line, I want to play this long-term game, I want to, be reelected or whatever, and so you have that to kind of at least somewhat make decent decisions. Here we don't have, right now, as much on-chain reputation, and that would be a big unlock. So you have to kind of focus on, these crypto credible commitments and these economic mechanisms to kind of bootstrap this and solve this problem.
Cool.
Maybe two comments what you have said. I found it really interesting. Just a brief comment, with the voting participation kind of. So I always like to take Switzerland as an example. I see it kind of as a DAO in real life. They have direct democracy on various levels, from the village to the federal state level. And there's actually research done showing that in a single, basically they have decisions every 2 months. So every 2 months they are voting. And they showed that at each single vote, basically there are only 20 to 30% of the population participating. But throughout 2 years, 80 to 90% of the population are participating. So I think when one does direct democratic decisions, I think you always have these three fractions, those who are in favor, those who are against, and those who don't care. And I would say, pragmatically speaking, those who have an interest should decide, and the others are okay. I think what one needs to take care of is that important issues reach everyone when necessary, kind of having media or something like this, that this becomes a topic of discussion so that people are aware that this is an important decision. And then for these long-term planning and token incentives and everything, I think a very good framework, which I found, is looking at the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of participants. And one can design actually tokens also more that they talk to the intrinsic motivation, talking to the competence of individuals, or also giving them kind of a feeling of relatedness, which maybe NFTs are doing, and more focusing on that and less on the financial aspects. I think then one gets a community which hopefully is intrinsic motivated enough to push also difficult decisions through. So, and yeah, just two comments.
We only have a few minutes left, but the last thing I wanted to touch on was kind of the evolution of what's happening with the SPL governance standard, and how you guys are sort of viewing some of those changes, and how you're adopting some of those changes and evolving your own DAOs as part of it.
Yeah, so we've been obviously the format of Monkey DAO has shifted over the course of the last 2 years as the technology and the stack behind it has shifted. So we've gone from either Discord-based voting, very simple polling, yes/no solutions, to now not only hosting multi-sigs on squads, our main treasury on the Realms interface, which is the current SPL governance standard, as well as building out our own voting interface, which we call DAO Vote, right? Where we want to not only open source and improve upon what we see for the current Realms standard, or the current Solana SPL governance standard, but also make it interesting, engaging, fun, easier for people to, view and be a part of governance. It shouldn't be something that, there's issues with either the platform or, any areas where people want to continue to come up and vote. So I think getting to the point where like improving the current SPL governance standard to the point where we can very easily add in not only financial management via a variety of different DeFi plugins and areas, but also gamify it and make it exciting for individuals to come to vote, to have the discussions in various areas be a part of their daily lives, and plugging all of those kind of right now disconnected elements together, regardless of where somebody is in kind of like the governance or execution process. Going closer to code as law and the idea that off-chain discussions can potentially be moving on-chain, so that there is proof of history of all of these different decisions and why they're being made, as well as to the idea of like how you effectively track not only transactions going in and out of a wallet, but what people are actually doing, and how these decisions have been enacted or enforced. That's things that we'd really love to see, and I think are slowly being built in the way of how you track the impact of a DAO in the SPL standard.
I think we're basically aligning a bunch of DAO members, right? That's the whole objective here, is let's align a bunch of DAO members and let's have them focus towards some shared goals, some shared vision. Obviously, this is not just only going to be humans at one point, like there will be autonomous agents that are also going to be maybe participating in this DAO membership, right? It's already starting, right? Like we build AI models, we use reinforcement learning to kind of train towards some sort of objective function. Like obviously one day we'll use ZKML and basically there will be an autonomous agent doing this. And so I would propose, and the hot take I would say is that we're actually on stage here solving the AI alignment problem in its own way, using cryptography here. And I think it kind of will eventually boil down to that as well.
Cool. Probably last question. We have 2 minutes left. What's your favorite DAO that you aren't a part of?
Since Monday is a monkey DAO.
Not there.
Nice. Good answer.
Yeah, I was asking what the floor price was earlier today. So.
Yep. I've actually been really enjoying a lot of the communications and the teams that I've been in touch with at Nouns DAO on Ethereum. Not only with like they have cross-chain different memberships, some of which are represented in various NFT collections, including the Solana Monkey Business Gen 3 for like homages to the Nouns goggles. But just to see a community going through the live in action of just like members actively choosing to engage or disengage over the course of the last few years, seeing how that has impacted the governance models, and seeing how those communities have continued to either grow, evolve, and deal with very large social issues in general. Of like, I don't think many communities could survive sort of the things that teams like either Nouns or for everyone here from Monkey DAO our fun last 8 months of various IP related disputes and going through the process of being, I think, one of the first DAOs to purchase and acquire not only IP infrastructure, everything related to an original NFT collection, and pushing that forward as far as we can. So I'm looking forward to finding more DAOs. I think I can also say, I guess they were voted yesterday, so I can't say you guys. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, those would be my picks.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, guys, we're at time. Thank you so much for your insights. Came away more excited about DAOs than I did before the talk. So really appreciate you guys' time. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.